Class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and today we're discussing Game 62 of the regular season between the San Jose Sharks and the St. Louis Blues, in which the Sharks have lost 6-3. Now, before we get into this game, let's take an updated look at the bottom of the standings here in the league. The Sharks stand pat at 48 points in that fourth last spot. The only other team on this list in action tonight, I believe, was the Chicago Blackhawks. They were regulation losers against the Dallas Stars, so they remain standing at 47 points. However, yesterday, the Anaheim Ducks did play and lose, but in overtime, bumping them up to 48 points and tying the San Jose Sharks for that fourth last spot. So the Sharks keeping pace in the tank for Bedard race with this regulation loss here tonight. But actually, on to the game here. This is now a matchup between former titans of the Western Conference. It was literally just 4 years ago where these two teams met in the Western Conference Finals as the Blues defeated the Sharks in 6 games on their way to winning the Stanley Cup in 2019. And now 4 years later, the Sharks are fourth last in the league. The Blues are not much better, and both teams have sold off multiple players this season. So it just goes to show how fast things around the league can change. But in this one, the Sharks start off exceptionally well in the first period. Not only are they playing very well, but the Blues are playing horribly, and on top of that, the Blues goaltender, former San Jose Shark Thomas Greiss, is also playing quite poorly as we look at the couple of goals that he did let in. So this seemed like the type of game that the Sharks might just be able to cruise to an easy victory in. They get a goal from Barabanov and a goal from Couture to make it 2-0 at the end of the first, and they maybe even could have had another there. In the second period, however, things completely flipped the other way. The Blues would score on their first 2 shots of the period to tie this game up at 2, and then from then on, the Blues just absolutely took control of the second. The Sharks generated pretty much nothing besides the occasional Barabanov opportunity. And suddenly the Sharks, who were up 2 goals going into the second period, were now leaving that second period instead down by 2 goals. So one of the worst periods for sure that the San Jose Sharks have played this season. In the third period, there is a bit of hope as Lorentz actually gets a shorthanded goal to bring this game to within 1, but then it is Tyler Pitlick who regains the 2-goal lead for the St. Louis Blues on a play in which earlier on, just a couple seconds earlier, LeBanc runs into Tomas Hertl. 2 Sharks players collide with each other, and what was especially egregious about it is that this wasn't even the first player-on-player collision for the same team that happened in this game, as earlier on it was Couture and Bonino who crashed into each other. And so it is rare enough to see that happen once, but for it to happen twice in one game is just insane, and the Blues capitalized on it this second time to make it 5-3, and eventually they would then also add an empty net goal from Kapanen very soon after the Sharks actually pulled their goaltender, and the Sharks, like I said, lost it 6-3. And so we have now the players to talk about. The top line, which had been very good the past few games, of Barabanov, Couture, and now Nick Bonino, not because Eyssimont was moved down to a different line, but instead because he was traded for Nemesnikov, a player who is still on the Sharks roster, but didn't actually end up playing here tonight, and he has only until noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern tomorrow to actually end up getting flipped to make any sense of that Eyssimont trade from yesterday, but I digress. On this first line, we had an absolutely stellar performance, at least in the first couple of periods, from Barabanov. By far, the Sharks' best forward here tonight was really so single-handedly making things happen in this game, had a ton of chances for himself. I'm wondering if Greer or Quinn or whoever gave him a talking to before this game and said, the trade deadline's coming up, there's technically an opportunity you could get traded, and maybe that was some juice in him to try and put up a strong performance here tonight to audition for some of the teams that might be watching, because at this point the Sharks, they're obviously not missing the playoffs, and so you have an opportunity to try and get onto a playoff team. Now, Barabanov's contract is not expiring this season, it is expiring the season after that, which makes him a bit more difficult because he's not a full-on rental, but he is not making a ton of money, and the Sharks could theoretically retain on half of his deal to make him a very attractive pickup. That is definitely an outside shot that he gets traded, but I would say it's leaning more towards he will be a San Jose Shark by this time tomorrow. On the rest of the line, obviously, like I said, Bonino was filling in for Mikey Eyssimont. Definitely not as strong on the top line as Eyssimont, which is funny because it's not as though Eyssimont is like some sort of amazing offensive player, but Bonino is even below that. This actually also may have very well been Bonino's final game as a San Jose Shark. While I was leaning more towards Barabanov staying with the Sharks, Bonino leaning much more towards him getting traded, kind of in a Cogliano situation from last season, so it's very possible he ends up getting moved for like a 5th round pick or something along those lines, which would be the final game for what was a very interesting, let's just say, couple of seasons with the San Jose Sharks. I thought he had an okay game here tonight. Nothing amazing, but pretty good and an okay compliment on this top line. Then we have the second line. Hertl kept with Zetterlund and Andreas Johnson. I thought Zetterlund was slightly better than he was in the previous game. He did have a few opportunities here tonight, a couple of good shots, but still not too much doing. Andreas Johnson, he did get an assist on the Barabanov goal, not necessarily the most impressive assist. He essentially just flips this puck out of the zone to try and clear, and then Barabanov puts on the solo effort there to be able to turn that into a goal for the San Jose Sharks, but at least it is an assist. Otherwise, a relatively barren game for Johnson. But the player who I really want to talk about on the second line is Tomas Hertl, and this might be a bold thing to say here, but Hertl may very well be my choice for the most disappointing San Jose Shark of this entire season. I just think about the expectations on Tomas Hertl. He is now the highest paid player, or the highest paid forward, I should say. Obviously, Karlsson exists, but the highest paid forward on this team, meaning the expectations are you to be the best forward on this team, and we have not seen much of that at all this season. If I had to count how many of these, very elite games that Tomas Hertl has played thus far this season, and that's what you should expect from a player making over $8 million per year, I could probably count that on, let's say, 2 hands. If I wanted to count that very same situation for Timo Meier, who was just traded a few days ago to the Devils, I would probably need to be an octopus to be able to count that many games, because Meier was an elite player playing at an exceptionally high level almost every single night, and Hertl, who is supposed to be similar in that regard, is just not doing any of that. And I remember last season it was very similar with Hertl, but I had originally given the excuse of, you know what, it's a contract year, his future is completely up in the air, and that might be a bit distracting to a player like Tomas Hertl, so I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. At least he's still putting up points. And while Hertl is still technically putting up points, 48 points now on the season, could very well hit 60 points by the end of the year, this is still a situation where there's no more Timo Meier to hide behind. He needs to be the player driving this line forward, and yes, there's a lack of chemistry with 2 literally new players here on the San Jose Sharks playing only their second games here tonight, but it's still nothing super impressive. Now, this is purely speculation, but I look at Hertl as an extremely emotional player. You could tell a few years ago when the Sharks were actually winning games, so many of those interviews, Tomas Hertl was literally just all smiles. He just couldn't stop smiling, laughing about. His brain would move faster than he could actually say words in English, which is not his native language. And so his interviews would come out kind of jumbled, but still kind of fun to watch, certainly, because he just was a player who exuded that fun aura, and you just wanted to watch play because, again, an all smiles type of player. But since then, with the Sharks now being bad for these last few years, it feels as though it's like a dark cloud over Tomas Hertl. Like he walks around with like you would see one of those cartoons where like the dark rain cloud follows around and just rains on him. There is no more of these smiles. There is no more of this exuberance from Hertl, and you can see it in his play as well. He's not able to have that same effect that he had back when the Sharks were actually a good team. And you could talk about a decline due to age. Hertl is now approaching the age of 30, but this is a situation where he's making over $8 million. He needs to be better, and he just isn't. On to the third line as we move on to the rest of this actual review and not Tomas Hertl video. Gregor, Sturm, and Svechnikov here tonight. Obviously, Bonino getting moved up to the first line. He leaves the third line vacancy, so Gregor gets jumped up here. I wasn't super impressed with this third line, and I think David Quinn may have agreed with me. I don't believe they actually got too many shifts in the third period of tonight's game. honestly just not too much to say about this line. When it comes to the forward line, they did actually get a couple more shifts than expected in that fourth period, or in that third period, I should say. They did generate a couple of chances. Obviously, Lorentz was the goal scorer, though shorthanded, and Lindblom did have a very good opportunity just very soon after that off of a nice play from Lorentz, or maybe the opposite there. I think it was a good chance for Lorentz off of a good play by Lindblom, but they did generate a couple of chances for the L line here tonight, but otherwise, there was the one goal that they were on the ice for, which was, I believe, the third goal here from the St. Louis Blues, which was not particularly impressive defensively, but otherwise it was a up and down night, I guess you could say, for them. On the defensive side, we once again have the top pairing here of Ferraro and Karlsson, and once again some massive growing pains. And I think the absolute perfect encapsulation of what this pairing is happened in the second period. I talked about it at the end in the review of last game, which was that Ferraro needs to be more used to playing with a player like Erik Karlsson, who is going to be jumping up in the play constantly, and you would think he would be used to that because he started his career essentially for the San Jose Sharks playing so much with Brent Burns. And yet in the second period of this game, there is a situation where the Sharks end up giving up a 2-on-0, and it happens because the Sharks get the puck and all three forwards break out of the zone. Sure, it makes sense up to this point. Bonino, Barabanov, Couture, they're going out. The puck is on Bonino's stick. When you watch the two defensemen here, Karlsson, accelerates forward to join up in the play, as you would expect, but Ferraro absolutely books it out of the zone, like as if he's skating like his life depends on it. He just zooms through the neutral zone, and by the time that Bonino makes a bad play here and tries to pass back to Couture, misses the pass and gives it away to a Blues player, Ferraro is literally in the Blues zone, further ahead than literally every other Sharks player on the ice. And it leaves you wondering, why is Ferraro on a pairing with Karlsson when he's seeing his three forwards already moving forward with the play? Why is he going so far ahead at this point? He needs to be staying back, and so he could at the very least defend on a bad play turnover by Nick Bonino. He could at very least defend a 2-on-1, but instead they give up a 2-on-0, and while this doesn't end up actually being one of the St. Louis Blues goals of this period, surprisingly enough, it is still an indication that there is a lack of chemistry between these two players. And so Ferraro needs to recognize that when you're on that pairing with Karlsson, you can't make plays like that. And you might be thinking, oh, why does Ferraro have to adapt his game to what Karlsson is doing? Why isn't it the other way around? Well, when Ferraro starts to lead the league in even strength points 3/4 of the way into the season, then maybe he can be the one speeding up into the play and getting up into the rush like he tried to do in this situation. But until that point happens, let Karlsson be the one running the offense, and you stay back in your own zone and make sure that if Bonino gives the puck away in the neutral zone for no reason, you're there to cover him. Anyhow, let's just move straight on to the goaltender here tonight, James Reimer. Interestingly enough, given the start here tonight, his previous performance was not good. Meanwhile, Kakanen's previous performance was good against the Montreal Canadiens, but it's possible that Reimer is given one last game here tonight because he may very well end up getting moved at the trade deadline. Like I mentioned, that is coming tomorrow, so this could have been like one potential last look and not the best look for Reimer. There was definitely a lot of these goals that he had very little chance on. I take a look at the first and the third goals, which was just awful defensive zone coverage from the San Jose Sharks for sure. The other two goals are power play ones. He doesn't have much of a chance on the Schenn one. The Pitlick one he could have had, but it's an extremely nice shot from Pitlick. But still, at the end of the day, it is 5 goals against. No playoff team wants to pick up a goaltender who's letting in 5 goals. And so, like I had mentioned multiple times in previous videos, Reimer, a player who the Sharks could have potentially traded for like at least a 3rd round pick back at the draft or last year's trade deadline because he had been playing so well, now is going to be like a future considerations type of situation at this point. But that will do it for this review. The Sharks will be back in action on Saturday when they will take on the Washington Capitals, a team who is in absolute free fall at this point. The Sharks on this season-long homestand have been playing against multiple non-playoff teams and have still managed to lose pretty much all of those games at this point, so we'll see if that continues. Class dismissed.